Welcome, everyone. This is the Shooting It Straight podcast with Justin Jackson. I am producer John, the host tonight. We have a super exciting show for you. We're talking all about UNC's win over NC State, breaking down all the different angles from that huge win for the Tar Heels. Jalen Washington saving the game with a last-second block there to keep the Tar Heels on top and helping them win in a really hostile road environment. We appreciate everyone watching us live here tonight on a Monday. Know there's a lot going on NFL playoffs, so we appreciate you spending some time with us. Justin, I'm going to come to you right away here on a Monday night. What were your biggest takeaways from that huge win against NC State?
Um, yeah, we were just talking about it. I think it's always tough in a rivalry game like this, right? Where it feels like North Carolina kind of has control of it, and then NC State comes roaring back. The fans, everybody gets super involved, and they start feeding off of that momentum. So obviously, it was a little closer than I would have liked, but a win is a win, especially in the ACC against a rival like NC State. I think there's a couple takeaways for me that's huge. I think the biggest one, which everybody's hopefully talking about, is Jalen Washington's kind of emergence as far as kind of the uh, biggest. What's the right word? Biggest presence when it comes to the inside for this North Carolina team. Obviously, we've had question marks around that position. Who's going to be the guy? I know, for me early in the season, it was Vin Allen. I felt like he was the most consistent big. Now Jay Wash, the last what 3 games? Last 3 games, he's got 12 blocks defensively. Um, it doesn't look like he's necessarily second guessing things as much as it seemed like he was for a while. And I think his presence and his ability to protect the rim and then offensively, be somebody that can catch the ball on drop offs and, obviously having the game sealing bucket off of a drop off, I think is huge for this team. And once again, it feels like there's just a bunch of dynamics being added to this team with Ian Jackson scoring the way he's scoring, and now Jalen Washington kind of stepping into that 5 position. So that was my number one, and then I think like I had just mentioned his name, Ian's consistency that he's had over the last 5-6 games has been really impressive. Like as a upperclassman, it'd be impressive as well, but let alone a freshman who to start the season didn't have a ton of minutes, didn't play a ton, didn't really know what the rotations would be as far as how much he would play. And I think the last 6 he's scored 23. He's averaging 23 points a game. So as a freshman, for one, that's massive. But to be able to do that for this team, it just creates a totally different look for teams coming in defensively against this team. So I think that's number two. And the last but not least is their defensive prowess that they've had the last few games. It's funny to start conference play. That was the number one thing that we said they needed to improve on was offensively. They seem totally fine. Defensively is where they need to tighten up a little bit. And in this game, they forced them to 37% and 16% from three. I mean, that's a recipe to win a whole lot of games, whether your offense is clicking or not. So those three were my biggest takeaways, man. And I love to see it in a game. I mean, heck, a lot of these guys on this North Carolina team, that was their first state rivalry game. So to be able to go in there into a hostile environment, play together, play locked in the way that they did the majority of the game, I was impressed, even though it was only a 2-point win.
Yeah, I definitely think that was a hostile environment, an impressive win to go in there and escape with a victory. I think this is one example where the non-conference schedule, playing at Kansas so early in the year, playing all up and down the East Coast in a lot of big time environments helps in a situation like this. This North Carolina team was not afraid in Raleigh. They were able to rise to the occasion and rise to the moment. A few stats to hit on this game real quick. North Carolina has not lost consecutive games to NC State since 2003. Really an amazing stat there. Consistency against the Wolfpack. It was also ugly at times, especially in the first half. It was a little bit of a rock fight. UNC led 26-20 at the half, the 46 combined points were the fewest in a first half between UNC and NC State since the teams combined for 41 in 1998. I was 1 year old in 98. So that shows this was not exactly the best half of basketball, but I think both teams improved, especially in the second half. I want to talk a little bit more about Jalen Washington, and I think this was so big for him on so many levels. I think number one for the fan base, it's exciting to see a player like Jalen Washington have that moment and take that step to rise to the occasion there. We're in the era of the one and done. We're in the era of the transfer portal. And here's a kid in Jay Wash who's stuck with UNC, who has kind of taken the old school steps in terms of
Mhm.
starting off as a bench player, earning his minutes more and more, and now he's in this big starting role, and he delivered in a rivalry game. I thought that was really cool to see. One other thing that impressed me, his block is going to get all the attention, his rebounding, his scoring, but I loved his pass to Ian Jackson. I think it was 2 minutes to go.
Mhm.
He was down 58 to 59 or something like that, and he kicked it to Ian Jackson on a short roll, and Ian drained the three-pointer. I think that showed a lot of growth for Jalen to be able to hit that pass. It's not a super easy pass to be able to catch it, know where the shooter is in the corner, but he delivered a strike there, and it helped UNC with the win. What are some other things that you saw out of Jay Wash on Saturday, Justin?
Yeah, I mean, going back to your point about him sticking with it and staying with the program, I think I'm a full proponent for players getting paid, right? Like I feel like the amount of money that the NCAA makes off of these kids is it needs to be given back to the athletes. But I think that's one of the biggest things that you're missing now in college sports is that maturity and that growth and that um, a guy having to sit there behind somebody else that might be better than them, might not, and has to continue to work and stay ready and be ready to go whenever it's their time and when their number is called. And Jay Wash is the perfect example of that, right? Like he was behind Armando, who was the best rebounder in the history of North Carolina. In the conversation as one of the best bigs in North Carolina history, right? So it's to see him continue to stay at it and stay with it. I think is a testament to his fight and his grit. And I think now, for me, when I watched Jay Wash now in the last game, I think at the beginning of the season he was very you could just tell he was kind of second guessing, right? That the play that you're talking about where he caught the ball in the short roll and kicked it out to Ian for a three. I think in the beginning of the season he might have still ended up kicking it out, but it would have been way more. It would have been a slower developing situation. The guys would have been able to close back out on Ian, but instead it was almost like second nature. Catch, look at the rim. If you don't have it, there's going to be somebody on the opposite side of the floor. Kick it to him, three, right? Or even something as simple as at the end of the game when he got that last block. I think there's been times where I've watched him and I've wanted him to go, you know, attack guys that are at the rim, right? And be more of a rim protector. But there's almost a second guess of do I go? Do I stay on my man? And in that one, it was just straight up, I'm helping. I'm at the rim. It's the end of the game. I'm going. And boom, block, gets the rebound. That's game. So I think it's just kind of seeing him get more and more comfortable. I think that's what I'm kind of seeing from him is his confidence is building. And then he's just kind of just playing, right? Like players, you can always sense whenever a player is just getting more comfortable, getting into a rhythm, more confident, because things just don't seem like they take as long to happen. And I think that's what I'm watching from Jay Wash. And so obviously shout out to him. I know we've talked about him a good amount as far as can he be that? We need him to be that. He hasn't been that. Well, last game and the last probably 3 games, he's been that for this team. So it's just a testament to him staying with it. You know, just like life, sometimes the ball doesn't bounce the way that you like, whether it's minutes, shots, and things like that. But he stuck with it, and I think he's kind of, I wouldn't necessarily say solidified, but he's definitely, I think, is as of right now the number one option as far as that five position. So, shout out to him.
Yeah, and he's absolutely taken a step as well in terms of a rim protector these last few games. I was looking at the stats in the ACC. He currently ranks 8th in the ACC in block shots per game. He's got 21 block shots in North Carolina's 17 games. And you referenced the stat as well, Justin. He has 12 blocks in the last 3 games, the most by a Tar Heel in 3 games since your friend Bryce Johnson had 13 against Florida Gulf Coast, Providence, and Indiana in the NCAA tournament. So that's really good company there for Jay Wash. Kind of a little bit of a similarity there too, because they both played with so much passion. You know, he was, doing that thing that he did after the game, but all throughout the season, he's been really passionate as a player. You can see he cares. He loves the University of North Carolina, and I think fans really respond to that. We have more to talk about X's and O's, but I am going to reference that. I believe the official term is Wolfpack down. What Jalen Washington and some of his teammates did after the game. Justin, you wore the UNC jersey for many years. You played a very high level against NC State multiple times. I'm curious, as a former UNC basketball player, what were your thoughts about the Wolfpack down after the game in Raleigh?
Uh, I'm sure maybe I'm kind of on the outside, and maybe I'm a little, if you want to call it old school or whatever you want to call it. I am the when it comes to that rivalry, whether that rivalry or Duke, I am full on. We don't like that other team, right? I'm right there. When I was playing, you get a little extra fired up when you play against NC State, especially when you go in there and you win. We never won in the fashion that they won, so I can only imagine there was a little more energy, and they were a little more hype than you would normally be. But for me, I think I always view things as kind of act like you've been there before, right? I think there's a certain, even though they're college kids, there's a certain, I'll use the word professionalism, but there's a certain sense of, yes, I'm all in for trash talking, saying whatever you want to say to the other team. But then there's almost a certain level of, hey, have you ever won anything, right? And with this team, they're on a roll, they're moving. For me, I would have loved to just see the block, rebound, game over, get hype, celebrate, go through, shake hands, and then do whatever you want to do in the locker room. I think doing it out in public with the cameras and everything like that, there's just a certain level of I don't even know necessarily what the right term is for it, but I think there is a certain, I always like to act like I've done it before, even if I haven't, right? But at the same time, it's a rivalry game, so emotions are high. There's no telling what those fans, what even the players or coaching staff were saying on the other side. Um, so I also I'm not on the court, but I think for me that's always kind of been mine. I've never been somebody to really shove it in somebody's face necessarily when it comes to beating them, because if I was on the other end, I would absolutely hate it. So it's you can see it from both sides. They're kids at the end of the day, right? And they're playing their hearts out, putting everything they have on that floor. So I can't necessarily blame them for it. It's a huge rivalry game. You come out and you win on their floor. But I think I personally would have handled it differently. But who knows? I know fans love it. Fans are probably the most hostile when it comes to the rivalry games, anyway. So I'm sure uh, all the fans were loving it. But for me as a player, you know, you can maybe handle it differently. But shout out to them though. Huge win. I don't want to take anything away from their win and everything that they did, especially Jay Wash and those guys. So you know, do what you got to do to put wins in the win column and keep it moving.
Yeah, I don't think you're necessarily criticizing them. You're just saying that's not what I would have done. And
Mhm.
maybe that's kind of how you're taking it. Even the chat is a little bit split on it. It looks like maybe 3-2 or 3-3 in terms of who's in favor and who's not. Definitely an interesting conversation. I think a big part of it too is that stadium specifically, kind of similar to the Cameron Crazies. The fans are just so close to the court, close to the tunnel. So who knows what's being said throughout the game and things like that.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. I wasn't on the floor. Now I've played in that rivalry game, obviously, and those fans are some of kind of the nastiest when it comes to things that they say and things like that to you. So, with that being said, um, like I said, I can't blame them if things like that were being said. But I think for me, that's just never been something that I've done. Yeah, I've gotten hype and maybe I talk trash within a game and things like that. But when it comes to okay, we beat you, I've always been somebody just kind of walk through, shake hands, move on. Um, but you know, I guess to each his own. I guess you got to keep the same energy from game to game. So if they continue doing that and
Hmm.
they continue to put wins up, then like I said, do what you got to do.
Yeah, the title of the show is Stacking Wins, and North Carolina has now stacked three in a row. We've talked about this team playing with more passion, more energy throughout the season. So if that's what it takes to do that, maybe that's a piece of it. Going back to basketball a little bit, or maybe the segue is another player who was doing the Wolfpack down after the game was Elliot Cadeau. But he really had a really strong performance against the Wolfpack. 9 assists to 3 turnovers, none bigger than that last assist that he had, kind of flipping it over his head to Jalen Washington. A few stats real quick on EC. The first Tar Heel to have multiple games with at least 10 assists in the same season since another one of your friends, Theo Pinson, in the 2017-18 season. And he's also the first Tar Heel with 3 games of at least 10 assists in his career since Kendall Marshall had 23 games with 10 or more assists from the 2010 to 2012 season. So again, really great company for Elliot Cadeau to be in when he's being compared or referenced to Theo and Kendall. You know, Elliot has had I think it's fair to say, a little bit of an up and down
Hmm.
season. His shot hasn't come as far as maybe some people, some fans would hope. But I think he's continued to prove his value as a distributor, initiating the offense. Justin, what did you see out of Elliot on Saturday, and how can he continue to build on this positive momentum of his stronger run of play recently?
Yeah, I mean, I think with Elliott, it's the same that it's always kind of been. I think shooting wise, he's not necessarily going to all of a sudden start shooting 50% from three. I don't know. I don't think. When he has those opportunities, I think it's a matter of him really stepping into that confidently. Um, a lot of these teams, we've already seen it, but I think it's going to continue as on all ball screens, they're going to try to go under or anything, any closeout or probably be a short closeout, that sort of thing. So in those situations, you have to keep, you know, players honest. You know, as far as the scout going against Elliott, it's probably just that. Like give up the 3 point, make him hit a couple outside shots. Don't let him get into the paint. Don't let him play make. But for Elliott, it's a matter of at the end of the day, he's the number one playmaker for this team, right? When it comes to facilitating, getting guys involved, making things happen for guys on the offensive end, he's the number one guy when it comes to that. So finding little ways to get to the paint, finding little ways to use that um, against other teams, right? So whether that's if we've talked about it before, but if they're going under on the ball screen, whether that's you can always race guys on the other side of the ball screen, which is just basically beating them on the other side and getting downhill. You can always do a rescreen to where they screen lower to where it's harder to go underneath the lower the screen is. So there's different ways that you can go against maybe what the scouting report is against Elliott right now. But I think for me, I think the bigger number is, according to ESPN, it was 11 assists to 3 turnovers. So for me, the bigger number is that turnover, right? In a hostile environment, playing against some guards that were scrappy, kind of trying to get after you a little bit, press you a little bit. To only have 3 turnovers while playing 30 minutes and being the main ball handler the majority of the time you're on the floor, for me, is huge. He went through that spell earlier in the season where he was, kind of struggling taking care of the ball. And I think it affected the rest of the offense when he doesn't take care of the ball. So for him to do that, I think we got a little lucky at the end of the game with that last play. I know some people are talking about and have talked about how he may have traveled a little bit, or the first option of the play, it looked like it kind of broke down and just got lucky that NC State fell asleep. Sometimes you got to get lucky to win games, and
Mhm.
Elliot had the wherewithal to be able to still find Jay Wash, even with the behind the neck pass, and um, come out with the win. So I loved what I saw from that. It's easy to say we need him to make outside shots, but I think those will come whenever they need to come. And everything else, as long as he's taking care of the ball and getting other guys, um, good shots and setting them up great, I think that's all he really needs to do for this team offensively.
Yeah. On the defensive end, I thought he had a pretty solid game overall. There was one possession in the second half that I noticed he really moved his feet well and kind of shut off a few of NC State's ball screens. I was impressed by that. And then yet another game that comes down to Elliot holding on essentially for dear life there at the end on a defensive possession. That's like 3 games now where he got another stop
Hmm.
with some help from his friend, but he got a stop there on that last possession. So Elliott's post-game defense, last possession defense continues to be undefeated. Another player who got a little bit more playing time against the Wolfpack is getting back into the lineup is Seth Trimble. 25 minutes for him, only 4 points, but he only took 5 shots from the 2 point range and 1 3-pointer that he missed. His offensive rating wasn't super strong in this game. He talked a little bit about after the game what his injury was and how he's coming back from that kind of that head injury. And that's a big adjustment for him. Getting back into game shape and things like that, feeling comfortable on the floor. But North Carolina is going to need him to get back to that level he was playing at earlier in the season. I think for me, it starts with the free throw line for him. He was getting to the line a lot early in the season, knocking down a lot of free throws, getting a lot of easy points there. In the first 2 games that he's been back, I believe he's only had 1 free throw so far. So that's something he can improve on as he gets back into the swing of things. Justin, what are some other ways that you would try to get Seth back incorporated in this offense? And, kind of one step further of that, is that something where you maybe would leave him in that 6-man role for a little bit? Or do you think maybe inserting him back into the starting lineup could be another way to get him going?
I think the issue with, and it's nothing that Seth did other than have an unfortunate situation where he got injured. I think it's kind of what we talked about at the beginning of the season is what are the rotations going to look like with it being so guard heavy, and now Ian and Drake both stepping into a pretty significant role and playing pretty consistent with that role. I think it's tough to now just throw him back into the starting lineup. That doesn't take away the fact that I think that he is one of the best players for this North Carolina team. But having that, it's going to take time for him to kind of get back and find his spots. Right before Ian started playing a ton and scoring 20 a night, basically, Seth was basically the number 2 option, right, behind RJ. And so, the floor seems, there's way more opportunities for him offensively. His confidence is way higher because he knows that, because he's one of the main guys and guys that they lean on. So I think now it's a matter of him finding what that spot is, but also staying aggressive like he was to start the season. I think for him, the in my opinion, he is the anchor for this team defensively. Right? When he gets out and he pressures and he gets hands on balls and gets out in transition, everybody else kind of follows. So for me, it's a matter of I think that's the easiest way for him to kind of get that energy going when he gets into the game is defensively pressuring somebody, getting a turnover, getting out in transition, kind of feeling that, and then offensively, it's just a matter of, as games go on, it's finding where his spots are, right? If plays are being ran for RJ and Ian the majority of the time, where do I find my spots? Where do I get my opportunities? And so that might just take a couple games coming back into a different role than what he was before he played. But like we've talked about, basketball is all about rhythm. So for Seth, it's a matter of finding what that new rhythm is for him, and also being super aggressive whenever he has those opportunities. So I think those are kind of the situations. Seth is an unbelievable rebounder as well, so maybe get into the offensive glass just to kind of, get going a little bit. Um, but I think that's where it starts is defensively, really getting that energy, getting that pressure, physicality, and being able to just kind of get into the flow of the game through that. And then I think offense will just kind of flow with that, just like the rest of this UNC team. Whenever they really pressure and are physical defensively, they're able to either get out in transition and get buckets, or offensively it just seems easier because of that energy, how it transfers to the offensive end.
Yeah, maybe another way would be getting some fast break points through steals,
Hmm.
getting some transition baskets that way. We're going to talk more about that defense in the second half of the show, but first, we want to thank and acknowledge our main sponsors for this show. First, Johnny T-shirt, the best place for Tar Heel gear. They're a Chapel Hill tradition since 1983 and 20-year partners of Inside Carolina. You can check them out online or on Franklin Street. If you're headed to Chapel Hill for any reason, if you need a jacket for all this cold weather we've been having in North Carolina. Did you get any snow in Tennessee, Justin?
We did. We had probably 6 to 8 inches
Oh,
out
wow.
here, out our way. Yeah, it was a
That's
lot.
awesome. We had like one here in the triangle. So, maybe you don't need a new jacket for 1 inch of snow, but if you need anything Carolina gear related, check them out at Johnny T-shirt and Congruity, the leading provider for Tar Heel business owners, payroll, HR, and employee benefits needs. Inside Carolina listeners can get a free payroll and HR assessment by emailing Matt at Congruity. We'll be right back in a second with more UNC basketball talk. We're live here on a Monday night, the Shooting It Straight podcast with Justin Jackson, talking all about UNC basketball. Really exciting time to be following the Tar Heels. We're in the middle of the ACC stretch, although it doesn't feel like it because the next two games are against Cal and Stanford. So, kind of an interesting stretch. Some new teams in the ACC coming up next for the Tar Heels. Uh, no love for Sean. No love for the snow. That's surprising. I was hoping for a little bit of snow this past weekend. Did you get any pictures with the little ones, Justin? There's another
we
question about that.
Yeah, we definitely got videos and pictures, and we've got two dogs as well. So they were out. They're both cold weather dogs, so they were out running around. Um, I'm with Sean after the first probably 1 or 2 days of the snow. After you're able to get out there and sled and make a snowman and just snowball fights, all that kind of stuff, then it's kind of like, okay, I'm kind of tired of this dirty, cold situation that we have going on. So I'm with you, Sean. I think with kids, it makes it a lot of fun to go out there and play for a couple days. But after that, then the process of having to go out and make sure the roads aren't icy, the driveway's not icy. Then I'm with you. Then let's go ahead and get back to some regular weather, which is kind of how it is now. I think today it was like 50. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a weird time when it comes to weather, but the snow is fun. The snow is definitely fun.
I'm I'm put me down for team 2 feet of snow, please. I would love that. Shout out to Sean, one of our regular listeners. We're gonna get another question in here from a regular listener, Melinda Dolphin. This is kind of a little bit of a different question, but an interesting one here at the midpoint of the show. Justin, did you ever wonder what it could have been like if you had stayed for your senior season? I'm curious, Justin, looking at it now, essentially kind of, 9, 10 years later, do you have any thoughts about what that could have been like?
I think it could have been fun. I think it was, I still had the guys I came in with and Joel and Theo, uh, Luke and Kenny, my best friends to this day. We're still there. So it could have been a lot of fun. Coming off of a win, I'm sure they had a bunch of fun, and fans probably came out. And were super strong. Plus, they had a good season the next year too. So it could have been fun, but I think sometimes you got to make business decisions. And at that time, there was no such thing as NIL. If NIL was in this, it was in the picture. then I think that would have been a different conversation. But at the time, the only way to really get to some of that good money was to get to the NBA. So obviously, for me, God always puts you in places that you're supposed to be, and I think that was kind of my journey. But it would have been fun. It would have definitely been fun to come back my senior year, uh, enjoy that, be able to graduate with those guys. But I was able to come back, graduate with Kenny and Luke, anyways. So I think it all worked out in the end.
Yes, absolutely, definitely worked out in the end, but a kind of a fun what if question there. We're going to keep it going with the listener questions. Zachary must have seen our pre-show notes because this is something that we were going to hit on over the course of this show. So I'll bring it up. Zachary Small, shout out to you as well, new listener. Haven't seen your name, so thanks for watching us tonight live on the Inside Carolina YouTube channel. Thoughts on Hubert tightening up the rotation? So we've talked about a lot on this show, more last year than this year, but Hubert likes to keep the rotations pretty tight, doesn't have a super long leash. It's felt like throughout this season, he's still been trying to figure out the matchups, what works and what doesn't. This was the first game where they really tightened up, 7-man rotation basically against NC State. Jalen Withers just played a little bit in the first half, got a DNP in the second half. What did you think about that tighter rotation, Justin?
I think that's kind of how it's been even ever since I was at school. I think the most Coach Williams would ever play was probably 8 on a consistent basis. And so, I'm not necessarily surprised that come conference play, Coach Davis has kind of changed it to this. Um, I think that, at the same time, I think those are the 7 players that will play consistently a good amount. But I think there's still going to be space for a guy like Withers, or maybe even a guy like Cade Tyson. If, shooting the ball wise, you need, a little more of a floor spacer. I think there's still going to be space for those guys. I think the crazy thing about conference play is you need everybody, right? Like you doesn't matter if Ian's averaging 20, doesn't matter if RJ like really gets back rolling. There's gonna be a game in there where somebody doesn't have it going and somebody from the bench is able to come in and change the entire game. And so while I think that that's the 7 that we will see on a consistent basis, I think that a guy like Withers, K. Tyson. You might even see James Brown every once in a while if there's foul trouble or whatever. Those guys will have a big game at some point within the ACC play. It's just the inevitable. And so, but I'm not at all surprised that there's, kind of cutting back on the rotations. It's those are kind of the guys that have proven themselves so far this year, and those are the guys who, especially here late, as far as winning some games, that have also proven that they're key parts of this team. So go with what works, go with what wins games. That's kind of the job that Coach Davis has, and I think they're finally starting to kind of get on that role that we've wanted them to be on.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of it will be on the matchups as well. It didn't feel like they needed kind of that big wing like a Jalen Withers on Saturday, but there will be teams, like maybe a Duke or something where his size and his athleticism will be helpful. With Cade, it's tough. I mean, the team's 3-point shooting has improved. Ian, I was gonna look this up. I didn't quite have enough time, but it felt like all of his 3-pointers were assisted on Saturday, and that shows that he's kind of serving as that floor spacer. So when he can space the floor and shoot as well as he's shooting, then maybe that role for Cade, what we expected him to be able to do, that's not something that he's maybe going to get the minutes to see that as much. I like the shorter rotation. I think another thing it helps with is kind of helping people find their roles within this team.
Hmm.
Jalen Washington is the starting big man. VAL is the backup. He's going to come in, energy, rebounding, bang around a little bit down low. Kind of helps with some of the front court, helps get your best players on the floor for longer. So I think it's a smart thing to do. Ultimately, trying to tighten things up, clean things up as the season and as ACC play rolls along. Another big trend for the Tar Heels has been defensively, how well they've been playing. Just to win a game in the 60s, quite honestly, is something that's impressive. Uh, you know, One of the things that I like to see is a team that can win in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. So for UNC to be able to win a defensive battle and kind of hold a team to that low of a shooting percentage, like you said earlier, Justin, is impressive for me. What are some things that stand out to you when you look at the Tar Heel defense, what they've been doing well the last few games?
Yeah, I mean, just going off this last game, I had mentioned the percentage that they held them to 37 from the field, 16 from three, but they also held them to only 12 free throws. So I think what we're seeing a lot more of is kind of what we've talked about is the pressure that they've brought pretty consistently throughout the game, whether that's a full court press or in the half court, right? Forcing these guys that they're playing against to be uncomfortable. And so a lot of times whenever you see the pressure get picked up or the physicality get picked up, you start to see a lot more fouls. So for them to be able to pick that up and play with that consistently throughout the game, but only allow 12 free throws, I think that's also a huge step just from the standpoint of playing smart defense, playing without your hands. Um, and things like that. So I love what I'm seeing defensively from them. It's just a different level. It's what we saw early on in the year, in those halves where they played really well, and we were just wondering why don't they play like this the entire game. Right now, we're starting to see it consistently. Is it perfect? No, it's never going to be. Right? There's going to be some blown coverages. There's going to be some overhelp to a kick out three. There's going to be situations like that, but as long as the intention is there of being the most physical, playing the hardest, executing whatever it is defensively that Coach Davis and that staff has for them, then that's all you can ask for. And obviously, it's showing that it works. So it's funny. People say you tell on yourself a little bit. This team has kind of told on themselves at this point as far as the defense that they can play. And if they play like that, consistently throughout the games, the full games, I think this team is a team that can make a really long run. I mean, especially how we talk about with the ACC kind of being a little not as strong as it has been in the past. They play like this. I think it's very up in the air as far as how well they can do in the ACC. I think they can make a run right now. They're 4-1. They've got two games against two new ACC opponents. So if they get both of those, that's 6-1 in your first 7 games. I mean, that's a start that anybody would want when it comes to the ACC. So, and a big testament to that is their defensive rhythm. I'll call it. Like you can tell everybody's kind of on one accord. Everybody's coming over helping. Big thing is Jay Wash being able to protect at the rim more. You don't necessarily have to worry about those fouls from guards because you've got a big at the rim protecting the rim. And so, I'm excited to see kind of as they continue to grow and even, kind of fix some of the things that we've seen throughout the game as well. There's certain points where there is just kind of a guy might fall asleep or maybe there's nobody that's supposed to be helping where they're supposed to be helping, right? So just kind of tightening up and then by the end of ACC play, you want to be the best version of your team and I think they're kind of on their way to doing that.
I had a few more defensive stats. Just looking on Ken Pom at the conference only statistics, UNC ranks second in defensive efficiency. They're first in effective field goal percentage, which just basically means they're playing really tight defense, preventing the offense from scoring very much, missing a lot of shots, generating a lot of misses. And then diving one step deeper, I was looking at some of the stats for defensively in terms of locations on the floor. What stood out over the last 5 games, UNC's at the rim field goal percentage, what opponents are shooting around the basket. It's 55.8%, which is the 92nd percentile nationally, which is really good. That's an improvement from the season long statistics. On the season level, opponents are shooting 60.6%. So UNC is trending in the right direction defensively around the rim. They're also trending pretty well on corner three-pointers. They're in the 95th percentile in the last 5 games in corner threes, field goal percentage as a defense. So that's one of my defensive takeaways. UNC is preventing the most efficient shots, those around the rim shots, those corner threes, forcing opponents to take a lot of 2-pointers. We definitely saw that against NC State. We talked about that before we got rolling, Justin. How many of NC State's shots were those 2-point kind of fallen out of favor shots from an analytical perspective? Maybe some of that is just who those teams are, who NC State is. But I think it's also a good sign for UNC defensively that they've tightened up around the rim. And definitely a big piece of that is Jalen Washington. Let's get another listener question in here. Just another kind of fun one, a grab bag here. This was a big talking point a little bit earlier in the season, Justin. I'm curious if you have any take on this at all. I'm guessing you don't have any scoop, unless you're way more connected than maybe I thought you were. But I'm just curious, as someone who played in the Smith Center all those years, do you have an opinion on what North Carolina should do with the future of the Dean Dome? Some people have talked about tearing it down, building it somewhere else around town or on campus. Would you want them to renovate it? Do you have no opinion at all, so long as there's 2 basketball hoops and a UNC logo at center court? What do you think?
Oh, okay. So I do not have any inside scoop. And to be honest, even if I did, I probably would not allow that inside scoop out. But I mean it's tough because I love there's a feeling that you have when you run out of that tunnel. And as fans, I'm sure you have the same feeling as you go down to your seats. There's a feeling that the Dean Dome has that I think if you make too many changes to it, can change that feel. Um, so for me, the inside, them doing renaming the court Roy Williams Court, with all the jerseys up there and all the banners and everything like that, absolutely love the feel of the Dean Dome. The improvement that I think could be made is maybe the outside. I think maybe we could maybe have some signage. We could have, uh, something that kind of gives that the feeling that's on the inside to the outside as well. But at the same time, the Dean Dome has been there way longer than I've been at Tar Heel. So I'm not going to sit here and say, yes, they need to knock it down. I personally, I love the history. I love like I said, the feel, the vibe. Um, Coming out of that tunnel, there's really nothing that feels like that. There's nothing that you can compare that to. And I think that there's not really much to change. The only thing, and I know there's a ton of maybe I'll get some backlash with this, is somehow finding a way to get students closer to the court. Um, that for me is the only change logistically that I would love to see. Um, is just having those students that are um, very energetic. I'll say that to be able to be closer to the court, not necessarily taking up all the other fan seats and that kind of thing, but maybe you do both ends, having the student sections, or you do one half of it as the student sections, but somehow getting those students um, closer to the court. But when it comes to the renovations and things like that, I love the Dean Dome how it is now, and hopefully it stays that way. If they make changes, hopefully it doesn't take away from that history and that feel that you get when you walk into the Dean Dome.
I like that take. That's a good take. I'm also team renovate. We've never talked about this, but my take is that you know how they can pull the seats out and in,
Hmm.
like for practice or whatever. If they were able to kind of like push those seats in and replace them with risers or something, I think that could be really interesting. The problem is you have to find a way to, replace all those seats and, figure out where to put them at other places in the stadium, the season ticket holders. But I think that could be an interesting way to do it. Maybe make a kind of stretch of and just pack the students in that section, kind of a
I
little bit
like
like
that. I
like
like that.
Cameron does. But hey, I'm not a real estate developer. I'm not a stadium designer. You're not either. So we'll see what
Exactly.
happens with that. That's been a popular topic this year on the message boards and things like that. So thanks to watcher Matt, listener Matt, for that question. We're going to wrap it up here by doing a quick preview of UNC's next two games. The Tar Heels face Cal on Wednesday at 7 o'clock in the Smith Center, and then they play at home on Saturday against Stanford. So two more home games for the Tar Heels. Opportunity to rest up, like we talked about on last week's show, remain in the state of North Carolina. And the title of this show, an opportunity to stack some more wins against lesser opponents, not the strongest opponents UNC will face all season. Justin, when you look at these next two games for the Tar Heels, what are some major keys for you for North Carolina?
Yeah, I mean, I think they got really lucky for not having to do the travel that Cal and Stanford are having to do. I think this is what makes the new realignment and things like that so interesting is having a team have come all the way from California and have to play in North Carolina. That's a wild travel schedule. But just like the SMU, I'm interested to see how these teams that haven't been in the ACC, how they adjust, how they play. It's going to be a different way of playing. Um, I think obviously the first game against Cal is a little bit more of an undersized team, kind of like this North Carolina team. But they've got, for all those basketball lovers, they've got Peja Stojakovic's son, who's averaging currently 20 points a game at 6'7". So I think he's kind of the number one guy when it comes to this team. Obviously, David is showing in the chat that they've got 4 or 5 guys averaging in double figures. So it's a very similar looking team to this North Carolina team from standpoint of the size, the scoring, how it's distributed, that sort of thing. But it's a very winnable and a game that they could be pretty dominant in my opinion. So then you go from that, you go to a Stanford team who is a little bit of a bigger team, a little bit more size. Their best players averaging 21 and 12 right now. Ray Nod. I wish I could um, which I really knew how to say his first name. It's probably way more simple than I'm making it, but so it's a little bit of a different challenge, kind of like that SMU game where the team's a little bit bigger, wings are a little bit longer, athletic. So it should be both games should be very interesting, but definitely two that they need to win, and hopefully they continue this defensive dominance that they've had, and also just continuing to show the consistency, giving guys like Seth the ability to get back and kind of find a rhythm, and everybody else just kind of finding, like you said, when you cut down the rotation, guys really start to fully see what their role is and what they can bring for this team on a night in, night out basis. So interested to see how they do against these two Cali teams.
Shout out to the 57 of you watching live with us on a Monday night talking about the Tar Heels. Shout out to everyone who's going to be watching this later or on podcast form. We appreciate everyone watching tonight. Justin, I will give you the final word tonight. Any last message for our viewers to close it out on a Monday night?
Yeah, I mean, I think I always like to kind of talk about the importance of things outside of basketball, right? And I think the last I saw, those wildfires in LA were um, kind of corralled and kind of contained, but that's a massive, massive thing that's been going on in other people's lives. And so, obviously, all prayers and thoughts are out to families that are affected, teams that are affected. Um, Players and things like that are affected out there. So definitely sending out the prayers and the thoughts to them. I think as far as this North Carolina team, it's a matter of just like the title of this says, stacking wins. I always like to say, and it's not, I'm not the originator of the saying, but stack good days, right? And so that means tomorrow you wake up, you stack a great workout, stack a great practice together, move on to the games. You got to stack a great dominant performance to have good film and the ability to move on um, to the next game. And you just kind of take that, day in and day out. And I think the way this team is moving, the direction that it's moving, the maturity that we're kind of seeing from different players within the team, I think is huge. And it's kind of, it's showing in some of the games that they're winning and pulling out and things like that. So super excited to kind of see how they continue to do that, how they continue to gel. So yeah, let's see if the boys can get these next two.